Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Heaven Official's Blessing. We're not in the little setup I made because the old mic broke and I'm using a headset for now. So we'll just hang out here. Hello, Pete, Delvin, Lobsel, Jeff, Skitten, Kohi, Alice, Don. Thank you all for joining us. We stopped last week, or the week before last, it may have been a minute. On chapter 43, our hero, Xie Lian, had infiltrated Paradise Manor, was invited in, either way, and was trying to figure out if his boyfriend, Hua Cheng, was hiding some secrets in the Paradise Manor. He and his friend, Shi Xuan, infiltrated a underground pass in the building, trying to find out what was hidden back there, and they ended up coming to a dead end. And that is where we stopped last time, and where we shall continue now, with Chapter 43, Borrowing the Underpath, Night Crawl in Paradise Manor. Let me get up here. Alright. Shi Xuan frowned. The road's cut off? No way! He held the palm torch in one hand and used the other to feel around the stone wall, looking for any signs of mechanics. He then cast a few spells for clearing illusions to no avail. The wall remained immovable. There wasn't much more he could do. Maybe I'll just punch a hole through it. That would cause way too much commotion, Xie Lian said. The entire Paradise Manor would be alerted. Shi Xuan placed his hand flat on the stone wall and blasted a short burst of spiritual energy, but dropped his hand after a moment. Even if I punch, it'd be useless. This wall is probably over 10 feet thick. Xie Lian saw with his own eyes that the masked youth had entered here. It'd be silly to think he'd sneak around just to meditate and reflect in a dead-end tunnel. There must be some sort of mechanism involved, so the two continued to examine their surroundings in greater detail. Soon, Xie Lian pointed. Lord Windmaster, take a look at the ground. There seems to be something. Shi Xuan dropped his palm immediately, and the two squatted around where Xie Lian had pointed. The ground of the tunnel was paved with innumerous square bricks, and each brick was about the size of a small door. The brick they were standing on, right in front of the stone wall, had a drawing upon it. It wasn't a large picture, but it was of a little person throwing dice. Shi Xuan raised his head. So does this mean it's the same method as before? We'd have to toss the right number to open the wall? Xie Lian nodded slightly. That looks to be the case, but I didn't come in here with that masked youth, so I don't know what the right number is. We've come this far, Shi Xuan said. It's not realistic to turn back just to find that out. Let's just throw a random number and see. That's how I did my SATs. Xie Lian agreed. Lord Windmaster, why don't you give it a go? I don't know how long my borrowed luck would last. Shi Xuan didn't decline. He picked up the dice and tossed them to the floor. How about that? He rolled a 2 and a 5. The two waited in silence, but the stone wall didn't move. Xie Lian picked up the dice. I guess that didn't work. Shi Xuan suddenly cried, Your Highness, look under our feet! The picture's changed! Hearing this, Xie Lian immediately looked down. Sure enough, the image on the square brick beneath their feet had been a little person throwing dice. But as they watched, the colors slowly faded and filled in once more, transforming into a different scene, looking like a long, fat, and thick black creepy crawler. What in the world is this? Shi Xuan wondered. An earthworm? A leech? Xie Lian guessed. That's what it looks like. There's plenty in the paddy field, so I've seen a lot. Shi Xuan wondered some more. What kind of life do you lead that you see this stuff? Before his words were finished, his entire person disappeared. It wasn't just him. Xie Lian himself disappeared too. Turns out, just as the words, what in the world, were uttered, they both felt hollow beneath their feet at the same time, and the next moment they started free-falling into another tunnel. Turns out the stone wall wasn't a door after all, and was, in all seriousness, a wall. The square brick beneath their feet was the real door. After tossing the dice, the doors opened suddenly and closed instantly. Xie Lian and Shi Xuan free fell for only a moment before landing heavily on the ground. It was a good thing the ground was soft, otherwise the two would have cratered in deep. They didn't think the fall was painful and were just pulling themselves up when their heads knocked into each other. They back and fell back to the ground. Xie Lian, with one hand covering his forehead, was feeling about his surroundings with his other hand, but only made contact with the soft, wet, muddy ground. Let's see here. Hello, Lucia. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Oh, oh, good luck at the dentist, Stone Pots. That sounds like fun. Let's see here. There were no more stone tiles. The stone wall was long gone. When they fell earlier, the palm torch Shi Qingxuan ignited had been extinguished. Now that he had it lit up once more and brightened their surroundings, the two discovered they were in a mud tunnel. The tunnel was round in shape with muddy walls and didn't appear to be man-made. Shi Qingxuan rubbed his forehead. What is this place? Did we get thrown in here because we tossed the wrong number? Xie Lian hummed and said, It's very possible. The stone door is gone, meaning we have no chance of turning back. Let's think of a way to escape first. The two talked it over and decided to keep following the tunnel path. The tunnel had innumerous twists and turns, and if a full-grown adult wanted to stand up straight in it, they'd have a hard time. They could only bend at the waist to walk or crawl, moving both slowly and tiresomely. The air in the tunnel was warm and moist, the mud clinging and annoying. Each of their steps sinking and dragging, watery and gross. Sometimes they would even step into the rotten remains of plants or animals. Xie Lian's face never changed, but Shi Qingxuan had goosebumps pop up all over. But the more they traversed, the more Xie Lian felt something was off. Lord Windmaster, we better move faster, otherwise... Just then, a loud, bizarre roaring sound came echoing. The noise crashed in, the entire tunnel shook, and small blots of mud pitter-pattered down from the quaking. The two looked at each other and without a word sped off in the opposite direction of the noise. Yet that loud sound and huge quaking shook the tunnel violently, and its speed was much faster than theirs, cutting in closer by the second. The two of them moved with much difficulty, one step shallow and one step deep, crawling through the twisting tunnel without end in sight, not even a ray of light. And not just that, but the directions they were running towards also reverberated the same huge noise and quaking. Both front and back were blocked. The two had to stop. Along with the crashing noises, the sound of a heavy, gigantic body pushing through the mud whammed past, and two humongous earthworms wiggled in, appearing before Xie Lian and Shi Qingxuan. The two worms were swollen and large, their bodies a bruising purple, their skin lightly translucent. The body of the insects were segmented, no head, no tail. The fronts were only a meat stump. If those weren't worms, then what were they? The stone door opened and threw them into a monster's nest. Xie Lian raised an arm to guard before himself, Rioi at the ready. Shi Qingxuan untucked his Windmaster fan from who knows where. Unfortunately, in the narrow tunnel, it was impossible to start any gusts. Any blows would only recoil, making it hard to make use of the spiritual device. Just then, Xie Lian recalled worms were afraid of light and heat, and he shouted, Lord Windmaster, please let me have some power and intensify the palm torch. Shi Qingxuan followed his direction and tapped Xie Lian with his left hand, while the flames in his right burst a few feet higher. Sure enough, the two giant worms felt the heat and shrunk back, pulling away a few feet in distance. The two, using the flames, continued their path slowly, forcing the giant earthworms to keep a distance, and prayed for an exit. However, the tunnels were narrow, and soon enough it wasn't only the worms feeling the heat from the flames. Xie Lian and Shi Qingxuan themselves were sweating profusely, as if they were baking in an oven, miserable and wretched. And the more horrifying thing was, Shi Qingxuan couldn't keep up burning his powers to keep the flames alive, and the fire grew smaller and smaller. They noticed that although the giant earthworms were evading them, they weren't as jittery. After a few more steps, Xie Lian felt his breathing grow difficult and said, Lord Windmaster, the palm torch won't last. The mud here may be moist and loose, but we're still deep underground. Soon the air will no longer pass, the fire will die, and we're going to faint. Shi Qingxuan gritted his teeth. Then we can only use the distance-shortening array. Although neither of the two had a free hand to draw an array and the current environment wasn't exactly ideal, there was no other way. Let me find somewhere flat, Xie Lian said. Just then he felt beneath his step a small plate that didn't seem to be moist and spongy, more like a stone tile. Xie Lian's mind moved, and he immediately crouched down to check. Just as he suspected, another stone door. There was also another drawing of a little person tossing dice on this door. Shi Qingxuan also stepped onto the tile and was overjoyed. "Quick, quick, quick! Throw the dice and open it!" Xie Lian was just about to toss out the dice and suddenly thought, "But what if I roll out worse outcomes and open a more horrifying place?" Xie Lian passed the dice to Shi Qingxuan. "Here, you do it!" Without a word, Shi Qingxuan grabbed the dice and tossed. Rattle, rattle. This time it was a 3 and a 4. Xie Lian picked up the dice readily, and the two stood together over the tile. The palm torch on Shi Qingxuan's hand became smaller by another inch. The two giant worms were squirming and twisting, struggling to approach. Xie Lian watched the drawing on the tile closely as it dissolved into another picture. It was of a forest, and a number of weirdly dressed little people dancing in circles around one another. Just then, one of the worms wouldn't hold back anymore and rushed towards them with a small mouth on the head opening, dragging its heavy body. Thankfully, just as the worms were only mere feet away from them, the stone door opened. "Hey, Akatsuki?" This time, the two fell into another narrow hole, but the ground was hard, cramped, and dry. The fall was painful, and the two tumbled and knocked into each other. Xie Lian was used to pain, so he didn't make a sound, but Shi Qingxuan yelled in pain. This story's so good at just dropping little sentences that are heartbreaking, it's not a lot, it's not very focused or detailed, but just, he was used to pain. That's such a sad sentence. Aw, sorry if you don't feel well, Jeff. Have a good rest. Don't worry about timing in, just, take a nap. That's always good. Xie Lian's ears were hurt by the loud screaming. Worried something might have happened, he called out, "Lord Windmaster, are you okay?" Shi Qingxuan's head was at the bottom and his legs up. "I don't know if I'm okay. I've never fallen like this before. Your Highness, there's way too much thrill working with you." Hearing this, Xie Lian couldn't help but let out a small laugh and realized the two of them fell into a hole in a tree. He crawled out of the hole with great difficulty and extended a helping hand to Shi Qingxuan. "Thanks for all your hard work." "You're welcome," Shi Qingxuan replied. He pulled on Xie Lian's hand and climbed out of the hole, muddy and disheveled, his silk dress robe ripped and rumpled. When he got out, he put a hand over his brow to block out the sharp brightness of the sun. "Where's this?" "As you see, a forest deep in the mountains," Xie Lian replied. He looked around him and said, "I think these stone doors are a spiritual device that have the same function as the distance shortening array. Different numbers tossed take us to different places. I wonder if we tossed any right numbers." Shi Qingxuan crossed his now bare arms and pondered seriously. Using the distance shortening array just once requires an immense amount of power. To create these stone doors to prevent others from snooping around, that crimson rain-sought flower is indeed powerful and no stranger to mind games. Although his expression was solemn, with bare arms and such an unkempt disposition, he didn't look serious at all, rather hilarious. Xie Lian held back his laugh with great difficulty. He thought about the way Hua Cheng would lift his lips and shook his head. Rather than mind games, it's more, he's mischievous, Xie Lian thought. Always making excuses for his boy. The two only just gotten out of the hole in the tree, and not even a few steps after, a number of red-skinned naked people suddenly poured out from the nearby bushes and surrounded them. They started jumping, howling as they did so. "Oh!" The two were shocked, and Shi Qingxuan cried, "What is this now?" Xie Lian raised his hand. Don't panic. Let's take a look first." He steadied himself to look at the savages. They truly weren't naked, but were wearing animal skins and leaves and looked ready to drink blood. They had long branch spears and sharp stone axes, and when they smiled at the two, their teeth were jaggedly sharp, like saws. The two ran without saying a word. Shi Qingxuan shouted as he ran, "My brother used to tell me, deep in the southern mountains are cannibals that live off human flesh. He told me never to come here on my own. Is that what those are?" Xie Lian was practiced in the art of escape, so his entire demeanor and manner were much more serene than Shi Qingxuan. He replied calmly, It's possible. Either way, let's find the door first. Let's see if there's any more stone doors nearby. Oh, goodness. I don't know how I feel about I guess they're supposed to be humans and not like ghosts. I don't know how I feel what these are. This is, Originally, Xie Lian and Xi Qingxuan could only escape and not fight back because there were heavenly laws that dictated should gods ever descend to the mortal realm, they shall not use their powers to oppress. The law was used to prevent heavenly officials from bullying mortals and creating disasters born of power abuse. But the cannibals unceasingly threw sharp rocks and branches at them, and one such branch scraped Xi Qingxuan's face. This was absolutely unacceptable. Xi Qingxuan felt his face, and there was the lightest of a bloody scratch, and saw red. He roared and came to a sudden stop. Turning around, he shouted, "You ignorant hillbillies! Not only did you not cower in fear before me, the Lord Windmaster, you dare ruin my face? Unbelievable!" After his cries, he pulled out his Windmaster fan, flashing it open with a powerful whoosh, and swung with force. They were blown off the ground and smashed into nearby trees, howling as they hung off the branches. The two could finally stop running and took in deep breaths, trying to calm their heartbeat. The thought came to Xie Lian again. It's hard being a god. In the three realms, no one had it easier. Xi Qingxuan huffed and turned to Xie Lian. "Your Highness, you saw it, right? They were asking for it. I wasn't using my powers to oppress." "I saw, yes," Xie Lian said. Xi Qingxuan felt his face again and mumbled under his breath. "Even my brother wouldn't dare." He turned around again. "Let's go find that stone door." Xie Lian nodded silently and watched Xi Qingxuan fix his clothes and hair, looking carefree once more. Unfortunately, he was dressed in a bedraggled purple silk dress, so his carefree air had a queer, peculiar flavor. It was an unforgettable sight. Xie Lian couldn't help but lament. Thinking back on when they first met at Banyu Pass, or was it, I can't remember how we were saying, I need to write all these down. The Lord Windmaster was such a scintillating figure, so much so that Xie Lian had thought him a powerful being with immeasurable depth, if not a supreme demonic cultivator, then a supreme saint. Now that they were close, he understood everything was but an illusion. The two walked around in circles in the forest and finally found a set of stone doors next to a different tree hole. This time, Xi Qingxuan refused to toss the dice and shook his head. "I don't know what's going on, but even though my luck isn't the best every time, it's also not the worst every time. Lady Fortune doesn't seem to be with me today. Twice I tossed, and the first time was the earthworm tunnel, the second time a cannibal playground. Who knows what's next?" Xie Lian cleared his throat softly and guiltily replied, "Maybe it's because I'm with you, so I brought your luck down with me." "What are you saying?" Xi Qingxuan exclaimed. "It's impossible for anyone to bring down my luck. I, the Lord Windmaster! But why don't you give it a go? Maybe there's still some of the luck you borrowed from your San Lang left." Xie Lian didn't know why, but he felt a little embarrassed when he heard your San Lang. He wanted to explain, but at the same time, what's there to explain? If he must explain, it must be a little weird, so in the end, he didn't say anything. He felt the dice in his hands and tossed them out lightly. 2 6s. Xie Lian held his breath as he watched the drawings on the stone door transform, and mentally prepared himself to face whatever came next. But this time, the picture didn't change, and the stone door creaked open. Behind the door was another long stairway that descended into darkness, blowing cold air. The two looked at each other, both thinking, did we circle back to the beginning after going through all that? Even if it was the beginning, it was still better than bizarre dangers. They'd had enough. Thus the two decided to descend. The moment they entered through, the door closed behind them, and when they reached out to push, the door had become a stone wall. "Looks like our only way is down," Xie Lian said. "Ugh, all right," Xi Qingxuan sighed. "Let me take a breather, and we'll continue to play that hateful Crimson Rain Sought Flowers game." The two once again descended down the long and rectangular stony path. After 200 steps or so, Xie Lian realized something. "Good news, Lord Windmaster. This isn't the same path we took the first time, even though they are similar." Xi Qingxuan noticed it too. You're right. The first time we reached the stone wall after 200 some steps. Not this time. Xie Lian said softly, "Looks like this time we're on the right path." Just as he finished the words, the two came to a stop. Not far before them, in the darkness, wafted the stench of blood. Accompanying the smell was the heavy breathing of a man. The two didn't move a muscle and said no words. No light, no flames. Yet the other party had already sensed their presence, because right after they stopped, a cold voice rang out. "I have nothing to say," the deep voice of a man said. Hearing the voice, Shi Qingxuan immediately ignited a palm torch. Chapter 44. Paradise to Ashes, the Second Coming of Fang Xin. Alright, what are they achieving? They're trying to break into Hua Cheng's secret vault and find out what's in there. And they finally have, and it's a man. Oh no, unfortunate, they found his man cave. Xie Lian didn't think Shi Qingxuan would suddenly light a fire and didn't even have the time to stop him before it was too late. The flames were exceedingly bright and revealed the silhouette of a black-clad man. The man in black had his head hung low against the stone wall at the end of the path, his face as white as a sheet, his hair a mess. But underneath that unkemptness was a pair of eyes that shone with determination like burning ice. Although he sat cross-legged without a trace of discomfort, the stench of thick blood in the air indicated he was gravely wounded, and was obviously imprisoned here. His "I have nothing to say" was probably him mistaking them for interrogators. Shi Qingxuan saw his face and cried, "It's you!" The man didn't seem to expect other people either, and was taken aback, looking like he wanted to say, "It's you too," but alas, held back. Xie Lian calmed his Ruoi that was ready to attack. "So, you two know each other?" After crossing so many hurdles and finding someone, Shi Qingxuan looked relieved and was about to respond when the man cut in. He said in an indisputable tone, "I don't know him." Shi Qingxuan raged at those words and pointed at him with his fan. "Is it so shameful to know me? What hurtful words, Mingzong! I'm your best friend!" The man denied it resolutely. "I have no friends that would run around in that sort of attire." Shi Qingxuan was still in his ragged purple silk dress, truly a shameful sight. Xie Lian wanted to laugh at the thought that there were really people in this world who would use someone's best friend to validate themselves. It was definitely Shi Qingxuan's style. But Mingzong, Ming Shang, I believe Shang is like what's that word called? Honorific, kind of? Is that the word that you use for a friend? Here's the note. It's a more formal way to say older brother, normally used informally between male friends. So basically saying that they're friends. If he remembered, of the 5 elemental masters, the Earth Master's name was Ming Yi. Xie Lian spoke up. "Are you perhaps the Lord Earth Master?" "It's him! You've met before," Shi Qingxuan replied. Xie Lian looked Ming Yi over and said, "Have we?" He didn't recall ever meeting such a character. "You have," Shi Qingxuan said. "We haven't," Ming Yi stated. "Yes, you have," Shi Qingxuan said exasperatedly. "Last time at Banyue Pass. You guys didn't forget that fast, did you?" Seeing Ming Yi's face go from pale white to grim when they met at Banyue Pass, wasn't there a black-clad lady next to Xing Qingxuan? Hua Cheng had already told him at the time that that wasn't the Water Master, but must be one of the 5 elemental masters. As expected, Shi Qingxuan was not only passionate about transforming into the female form, he was also passionate about dragging others into doing the same. No wonder the black-clad lady at the time had looked extremely pissed off. Thinking back on how Shi Qingxuan had begged him to join in on the fun, Xie Lian sighed, thinking it was a close call and was glad he didn't relent. Are we going to watch the anime of this or the other one? I was actually thinking we'd do a watch tonight, because it's been a while. Probably of this show, I would think. There's like 4 or 5 episodes out now. I'm super excited. It looks very good. So, in the Banyue, I think is how it's said, that incident, remember that's kind of where we met the Wind Master. There was 2 ladies. The one in black that didn't speak very much was the Earth Master, who Qingxuan forced to turn into a lady because he just thinks that's so much fun. Because he's so, like, so non-binary, queer, like, hey, play around, let's do it, and everybody else is like, stop making me do this. It's really adorable. All right. Lord Earthmaster, was the ascending fire dragon set forth by you? Xie Lian asked. It was, Ming Yi answered. They'd found the right person. Xie Lian nodded and said, the Lord Earthmaster's probably heavily wounded. We'd best make our escape now and talk later. Without any prompt, Xi Qingxuan knelt down and carried Ming Yi on his back. Then let's get out of here. The three traced their steps back, and Xi Qingxuan talked as he walked. I say, Ming Xiang, aren't you good at fighting? You were perfectly fine back at the Banyue Pass, so how did you get beaten up this badly in just a few days? How did you piss off Crimson Rain Sought Flower? His tone was a teasing taunt. Xie Lian mentally noted, speaking as though he isn't afraid of getting punched. They really are good friends. Ming Yi looked like he'd had enough of listening to Xi Qingxuan talk and only said, shut up. Xie Lian also wanted to know the answer to the question, but changed his wording. Lord Earthmaster, why would Hua Cheng want to make things difficult for you? Ming Yi didn't tell him to shut up, but he didn't answer either. Xie Lian turned his head slightly to look at him and saw he had his eyes closed. After having been imprisoned and interrogated for days and heavily wounded, Ming Yi must have finally let down his guard after being rescued and could relax at last. It wasn't anything urgent anyway, so Xie Lian didn't try to wake him. The three ran up the stairs, and Xie Lian threw out his dice at the top. He didn't know what number he tossed out in the dark, only that before them came a soft creaking sound, and a crack of light appeared. Xie Lian pushed out the door and was just thinking about whether he'd have the chance to take Lang Ying away too, when he realized the first step he took was hollow. The moment he felt himself fall forward, he cried, Don't come out! Xie Lian somersaulted in the air and fell on something hard. He was just feeling relieved it wasn't some bladed mountain or a sea of fire he fell into when he raised his head and realized a bladed mountain or a sea of fire might have been a better alternative. Hua Cheng's exceptionally handsome face was inches away from his brows raised, looking at him. This time, when the stone door opened, his hollow step made him fall on top of Hua Cheng. The place of his fall was the armory. Hua Cheng was seated on the throne of the armory, composedly wiping the scimitar Yiming. Even when someone suddenly fell into his lap from above, he'd only moved his hands away and stopped cleaning without any air of surprise. He calmly looked at Xie Lian as if waiting for an explanation. Of course, Xie Lian had none, and could only lay in his lap and stare back boldly. Suddenly he saw another person at the peripheral of his vision, and when he turned around, he saw Lang Ying. Oh man. This scene's gonna be great in the show. The bandaged boy was sitting on the floor looking frightened, his hands grabbing his head, staring at the two of them. Why was Lang Ying here too? It looked as if Hua Cheng was interrogating him, and when Xie Lian's eyes moved upward, he saw half of Xi Qingxuang's white boot stepping out. There wasn't time to think, and in a hurry, Xie Lian gripped Hua Cheng's shoulders. I'm sorry, Xie Lian cried, then pushed Hua Cheng aside. This push threw Hua Cheng a meter away, and even he tumbled a couple times. After tumbling, Hua Cheng immediately stood and steadied himself, and by then Xi Qingxuang, carrying Ming Yi, already jumped and landed with ease in the same spot Hua Cheng had just been sitting. Xie Lian forced himself to look back, and Hua Cheng was still looking at him without a word, but one side of his brows was raised even higher. Xie Lian leapt to his feet and backed off a few feet, apologizing as he did so. I'm sorry! I'm sorry! Lang Ying ran towards Xie Lian while watching Hua Cheng, still appearing quite afraid, and hid behind him. Xie Lian shielded him and said, San Lang, allow me to explain. I'm waiting, Hua Cheng responded. Wait, isn't it the opposite? Xi Qingxuang spoke. He should be the one who owes you an explanation. He's the one responsible for the missing heavenly official. Be wary, Your Highness. This was exactly the situation Xie Lian didn't want to face. He looked at Hua Cheng intently. San Lang, I don't know what the misunderstanding was between you and Lord Earthmaster, but let's all calm down and talk about this. The best-case scenario would be Hua Cheng letting them go without harm. Although the Earthmaster was wounded, his life was not at stake, and he wasn't missing any limbs. If he could drop it, then this wouldn't have to devolve into the worst-case scenario. If Hua Cheng let them leave and they reported back to the heavens, they'd be in his debt, and Xie Lian could use it as a chance to ask Jun Wu to dismiss the whole thing. However, Hua Cheng said instead, Earthmaster? What Earthmaster? After a pause, he continued, Oh, do you mean the one the Windmaster's carrying? He's nothing more than an inept subordinate of mine. Hearing this, both Xie Lian and Xi Qingxuan were taken aback. Let's see. Yeah, this is a pretty fun scene. Let's see here. Hua Cheng laughed. I wonder why your honorable heavenly official would hide his identity, drop his respectable title, and work as an officer under me. Hua Cheng drew out Yiming in a crescent moon flash. If he truly is the Earthmaster, then what patience to put on an act for 10 years. In the past 10 years, I had thought him suspicious from time to time, but there was no proof. If it wasn't for bumping into him and the Windmaster at Banyue, I'd still be in the clouds. In that moment, Xie Lian understood everything. That's what happened. The Earthmaster went missing and was imprisoned, ultimately because he'd hidden his true identity 10 years ago, to go undercover as a ghost officer under Hua Cheng. In other words, he was a spy. Hua Cheng had thought his actions suspicious, but without concrete evidence, he'd only kept him under his watch. And it was only recently that Hua Cheng finally uncovered his identity as Earthmaster. During the journey to Banyue Pass, Hua Cheng had seen the Earthmaster next to the Windmaster. Even under the disguise of a woman, Hua Cheng saw beneath the fake skin and discovered the black-clad lady was the ghost officer he suspected, and locked on to his identity as one of the 5 elemental masters. After the whole ordeal at Banyue had concluded, Hua Cheng probably left Puqi Shrine to go conclude things with the Earthmaster. It may have been during Hua Cheng's pursuit to kill, whilst under dire circumstances, that Ming Yi set off the distress signal. Then Jun Wu summoned Xie Lian and gave him the mission to run this rescue. That a heavenly official did not mind his duties, but instead went undercover in the ghost realm for over a decade was quite the scandal. Never mind the politics behind it. If Ming Yi was to remain imprisoned and tortured, then all heaven would break loose if he was to actually die at Hua Cheng's hands. It would be absolute chaos in the world. If that day were to come, no one would be spared. After thinking all this through, Xie Lian could only say, I understand the fault is ours, but San Lang, I hope you will let us go this time around. Hua Cheng watched him intently, and after a moment said in a calm tone, Your Highness, some things are best not to get involved in overmuch. Suddenly, Xi Qingxuan cried from the side, Wind, come to me! The moment the fan came out, wild gusts started blowing through the armory. The many weapons hung on the walls, and the shelves started rattling. Lord Windmaster, we haven't done anything yet, Xie Lian said, alarmed. I don't think either of you are going to make a move first, Xi Qingxuan said, so I'll be the bad guy this time. Wind! Wind, come to me! There was a huge cracking sound, and Xie Lian could feel layers of dust falling on his head from above. He raised his head and saw it was the roof being raised by the gusts, breaking at the seams into a large crack. The armory had no windows or other visible exits, and Xi Qingxuan had no intention to fight, but rather to escape through the crack in the roof. Within the mad gales, Hua Cheng's raven-black hair and maple-red clothes flew wildly with the winds, but his person never moved. He smirked. You have a fan. Coincidentally, so do I. From one of the many shelves, Hua Cheng retrieved a fan. It was small and intricate, its spine and leaf made of pure gold, serene and beautiful. Hua Cheng twirled it in his hand, snapping it open. He grinned wordlessly, elegant amidst his murderous aura. He flipped his hand and fanned, and a strong gust shot towards them with a blinding silver flash. The 3 dodged and heard behind them the sound of hail-like darts smashing against the walls and ground. When they turned their heads to see, it was long rows upon rows of golden foils nailed to the ground, each foil thin but deeply embedded, its sharpness apparent and vicious. Each weapon within this armory was a treasure to behold. Even a weapon he grabbed at random could have such a murderous effect. Hua Cheng flipped his hand again, and another golden gust blew. The winds called forth by Xi Qingxuan were strong, but the stronger they were, the more dangerous the situation became. The armory was a mere chamber, its space limited. A portion of the winds raised by the Windmaster fan would rebound around the interior, hauling the golden foils along, dancing in the madness. Xie Lian was afraid the golden foils would harm people, so he shielded Lang Yi and cried, Lord Windmaster, please, stop for now! The golden foils had continuously brushed closely against Shi Qingxuan and Ming Yi. Shi Qingxuan wanted to stop too. However, the roof had been raised by his winds, revealing a crack, and if he should stop now, all of his efforts would go to waste. Just then, the golden foils encircling them suddenly flew upwards uniformly. There was a cacophony of cracking before a person broke through the roof and jumped through the crack, debris and dust coming down with him. The moment he landed, the person shouted, "Lord Windmaster, I apologize, but I couldn't sit still anymore." Shi Qingxuan was overjoyed. "Changchu, you've come in the nick of time." The young man carried a longsword, its blade the size of a grown man's palm. It was indeed Lang Changchu. His long sword was a shimmering gold, but looking at it closely, it wasn't because his sword was golden, but because it had sucked up all the golden foils, covering the blade completely, making it look as if it was a golden sword. Lang Changchu's longsword was forged by a curious metal born of a lodestone mountain, and had the ability to magnetize metals. As long as the object of suction did not exceed a certain level of spiritual power, once he had the sword in hand, he could mentally release its ability and magnetize all surrounding metals, melting into his blade. Sure enough, soon the innumerous golden foils were all sucked into the sword and dissolved in the blade. Seeing this, Hua Cheng laughed out loud, closed his fan, and threw it away behind him. Are the heavenly officials so pathetically poor they couldn't let a teeny bit of gold go? If those words were directed at Xie Lian, he would only pretend not to have heard them, but they were directed at Lang Changchu, a noble born of royalty. He hadn't cared for riches his entire life, and although he knew the enemy was intentionally taunting him, he was still boiling with rage. He raised his sword with both hands and struck towards Hua Cheng. Hua Cheng drew out his scimitar with one hand, generating silver shimmers in the air, calmly ready to welcome the attack. Lang Changchu's strike used all his power. He was like a newborn bull, fearless of tigers, but Xie Lian had clearly seen the difference between their strengths, and if this strike was to land, he would die for sure. On the sidelines, even Shi Qingxuan, who was no swordsman, watched with alarm and yelled, "Chengchu, don't!" But in that split second, how could a shout stop the arrow that's left the bow? Just as the blades of a sword and a scimitar were about to make contact, a blinding white light blew up within the armory. It was a light so immense it covered every inch of the armory, and everyone lost their sight temporarily. All they could see was white. Xie Lian, however, was prepared and could see with some difficulty. His right hand gathered all the powers he'd borrowed from Shi Qingxuan and created a giant flame and blazed it towards a random direction. A corner of the armory immediately caught on fire. Soon after, Xie Lian released Ruoy and wrapped himself, Shi Qingxuan, Ming Yi, Lang Changchu, and Lang Ying. He shouted, "Lord Windmaster, blow us upwards!" Even though Shi Qingxuan couldn't open his eyes, he still followed Xie Lian's direction. He raised his fan and snapped it downwards, and a violent twister formed from flat ground, blowing towards the ceiling and at last breaking through the shaky roof. Ruoy had the 5 of them in a bundle and flew towards the sky. In midair, sight finally returned to many of them, and Shi Qingxuan could see down below the giant flames ablaze, black smoke heavy in the air. The armory was burning. He was afraid Hua Cheng would give chase and flapped his fan. Now it really became fanning the flame. The blaze instantly erupted in size, and kindles landed on all the nearby buildings. Now half of Paradise Manor was ablaze. With great difficulty, Xie Lian finally grabbed hold of Shi Qingxuan, who was fanning with all his might. "Lord Windmaster, please stop fanning! The whole place is going to burn down!" Startled, Shi Qingxuan cried, all right, I'm stopping! Let me go, Your Highness, your grip's too strong!" It wasn't until the Windmaster stopped his winds that Xie Lian let go. He looked down, and amidst the red flames, Xie Lian was able to spot a crimson silhouette. They were too high in the sky, and he couldn't see clearly, but his gut instinct told him that in that moment in time, Hua Cheng was standing there, watching him. He didn't give chase, and he didn't put out the flames. He only stood there, letting the wildfires devour capriciously. Outside the Paradise Manor, screams and howling roared from all over the Ghost City streets, and crowds of ghosts ran amok. Xie Lian couldn't breathe, and his voice cracked, mumbling to himself, "I only wanted to start a small fire to create a distraction. How did it turn out like this?" It was only earlier that Hua Cheng had leaned against the doors of that armory, half-jokingly telling him he wanted to gift him the entire armory and every weapon inside. Now everything was engulfed in a sea of fire. Although there may be many golden devices that were unafraid of intense heat, surely there were also some that could not touch flames. After all this burning, many treasures would become ashes. Xie Lian had not expected the flames to grow so violently, devouring the entire Paradise Manor. Even if Huacheng didn't consider it home, it was still his residence. Seeing how crushed Xie Lian was, Shi Qingxuan also felt bad. I'm really sorry, Your Highness. I didn't think things through and wanted to escape faster. This is all my fault. It was definitely a small flame at first. If Crimson Rainsalt Flower comes knocking for paybacks, you just tell him to come to me. Don't worry. I can pay whatever amount. Money's not an issue. But money was definitely not the issue. Xie Lian closed his eyes and couldn't speak. Shi Qingxuan patted his shoulder in consolation, but suddenly felt wetness in his palm and a strange, stark smell of blood. He turned his head to see, and his face lost color. Your Highness, what happened to your hand? Xie Lian's right hand was covered in blood. His entire right arm was thoroughly dyed with blood, and the trembling was not slight. Yet both his hands still sternly held on to that white silk band to keep everyone from getting blown apart by the wild winds. What's going on with you? Shi Qingxuan cried. Xie Lian blinked back and strained to steady himself before shaking his head. It's nothing. Just a small injury. It'll get better once we get back. That white light was you? Shi Qingxuan remembered. Your Highness, you broke those two off? I'm a swordsman, after all, Xie Lian replied. Shi Qingxuan had guessed right. Right then, when the blades of Huacheng and Lang Changchu were about to make contact, Xie Lian flashed in. He picked up a sword from the pile of weapons on the shelves and made 2 moves between the sword and scimitar. The first, he knocked back Lang Changchu's long sword. The second, he blocked the scimitar Yiming. The strength of those 2 moves was not only powerful, but extremely well controlled. Even when Xie Lian blocked both blades, the force of the strikes were not rebounded onto the attackers, because with Xie Lian sandwiched in the middle, he used his sword and his own arm to absorb both attacks completely. Lang Changchu's longsword was manageable, but Huacheng's scimitar was a force to be reckoned with. The sword Xie Lian used was one from Huacheng's collection, so naturally it was a formidable blade. When the 2 blades met, it blasted that blinding white light. With the 2 moves, the first strike against Lang Changchu's longsword created a crack. The second strike against the scimitar Yiming shattered the sword to pieces. All this was done within the fraction of a second, faster than the eye could see. Shi Qingxuan looked at the miserable state of Xie Lian's right hand, the whole right arm a bloody mess. He commented, Your Highness, you're way too intense. I can't believe you blocked them single-handedly. The flower-crowned martial god, sword in one hand, flower in the other. Shi Qingxuan only remembered the flower, but had forgotten. Xie Lian ascended because of his sword. Thinking back on how close of a call it was, Shi Qingxuan's heart was still racing. Thank goodness Your Highness had the moves, otherwise who knows how many pieces Lang Changchu would be cut into by Huacheng. The strange thing was, next to them Lang Changchu appeared unharmed, but his expression was frozen, like his soul had left his body. Chengchu, Shi Qingxuan called. Chengchu, are you okay? Wake up, what's up with you? Has your sight not returned yet? Riding on the tailwind, the group of them finally reached the heavenly capital. Dragging and carrying, they rushed past the Ascension Gate and ran straight for the Great Martial Hall. Lang Ying couldn't enter the hall, so Xie Lian settled him in a small side chamber. No one seemed to be on duty, so he called within the communication array. Is there an honorable official here? Please, everyone, come quick to the Martial Hall. It's an emergency. We have a wounded official. As he shouted, next to him, Shi Qingxuan snapped his fingers and switched back to his white cultivator robe and released 100,000 merits. It's 2 wounded officials. Xie Lian said hurriedly, Lord Windmaster, don't be so excited. We can just talk. There's no need to release any merits. Everyone will naturally come. No, Your Highness, Shi Qingxuan said. You have to know spreading merits works faster than talking by 100 times. Soon enough, a voice came from afar. Who's wounded? When the word who was uttered, the voice was still far away, but by the last word the person had appeared, and it was Feng Xin. He entered the hall and looked at Xie Lian and then at Lang Changchu, his face faltering. I'm fine, but the Lord Earthmaster seems to be heavily wounded, Xie Lian said. After a moment of silence, Feng Xin said, What happened to your right hand? So what? Another voice came. There's so many heavenly officials. Who ever returned unscathed after a round of patrol? The voice was decorous and mellow, but the words sharp. It was Mu Qing. He crossed into the great hall and also took a look at Xie Lian and then at Lang Changchu. Yet his expression was the opposite of Feng Xin, having only raised a brow as if ready to spectate a good show. He saw that Feng Xin... Oh, they spelled it wrong. Feng Xin moved to check on Xie Lian's arm, so he bent to check on Ming Yi. He said, "So this is the Lord Earthmaster." During the exchange, a number of heavenly officials poured into the hall. The Earthmaster Yi had always been inconspicuous and out of sight, and so for many it was the first time they'd ever seen him, and they cluttered around staring in curiosity. The masses were mostly confused, not knowing the reason they were called to the Great Martial Hall, but having collected the Windmaster's merits, they had to come and check things out. "Thanks, but I'm all right. It'll get better by itself after a while," Xie Lian said to Feng Xin. Feng Xin didn't mince words. "Watch yourself." Xie Lian uttered another thanks softly, but when he turned around, Lang Changchu was watching him with a frozen expression. "Your Highness Taihua, what's wrong?" he asked. Feng Xin also noticed something off about Lang Changchu and questioned, "Was His Highness Taihua also injured somewhere?" "I don't think so. Let me see," Xie Lian said and extended his hand, reaching for Lang Changchu's brow. Yet, in a flash, Lang Changchu seized Xie Lian's wrist. There was hesitation on Lang Changchu's face, as if he discovered something but wasn't sure. A fire had started burning within his eyes. Xie Lian felt a wave of rage trembling from Lang Changchu's arm to his. Now all the spectating officials had noticed this strange situation and started whispering amongst themselves. Shi Qingxuan and Mu Qing both started to rise, and Feng Xin spoke. "Your Highness Taihua, what are you doing?" Lang Changchu finally moved his lips. He only said 2 syllables, but Xie Lian's heart sank to the very bottom. "Gyoshi?" Lang Changchu gritted his teeth. Xie Lian's pupils shrank slightly. The on-looking officials, half guessing, half confused, muttered, "What Gyoshi? Who's the Gyoshi?" Some were more astute and figured it out. Lang Changchu was the crown prince of Yong'an, and the Gyoshi of Yong'an during his time was the second of the 2 wicked masters, the Gyoshi Feng Xin. No one knew of his origin or his real identity, yet here Lang Changchu had Xie Lian in his grip and called him Gyoshi, meaning Xie Lian was the evil that brought ruin to Yong'an, the Gyoshi Feng Xin. However, Xie Lian was the crown prince of Xianli. The kingdom of Xianli had fallen in the hands of the kingdom of Yong'an, so why would he go and become the Gyoshi of Yong'an? The Prince Taihua was renowned for his optimism and cheerfulness, never having played mind games or made things difficult for anyone, and he never exhibited such an expression, half despair, half rage, half enmity, half hatred. Lang Changchu had Xie Lian in a deathly grip, his breathing becoming harsher, and finally said in a strained voice, I clearly killed you with my own 2 hands, sealed you in that coffin. You certainly are a crafty one." Heavens, it looked like something big was going to go down today. Dun dun dun! So if you're a little confused, that did happen very fast. During the fight, when he defended Changchu from Huacheng, Changchu recognized his sword form and recognized that he was his Gyoshi, which Gyoshi means like teacher, master. In his lifetime, back ancient times when he was alive, his teacher was Xie Lian, and they ended up being enemies, and he killed him, he thinks. He's just realized that Xie Lian is his former teacher that betrayed him, and he's not happy about it. Of course, like so many other things in this book, there's more to the story, and we'll find out eventually what happened and why things went down the way they did. This whole section is just so heart-wrenching. I mean, the scene with Huacheng, when you know the whole story, says so much. You know, the house is on fire, his treasures are burning, but he's just watching Xie Lian go away, and Xie Lian is so upset that he's hurt him, and down on the ground, you know, Huacheng's upset that he hurt Xie Lian, because Xie Lian's whole right arm is bleeding because he blocked and absorbed Hua Chang's blow. So they're both just like, oh, what have I done? But they both think the other one's mad at them, and, you know, typical drama in this kind of story. It's lovely. I believe we're coming up on the end of book 1. Let's see, what chapter is this? We just finished chapter 44. Let me see here. Yes, we're now on chapter 45. We will probably read it next time. Let me see. I'm going to scroll and see when chapter... Let's see if I can find book 1. When did the mic go off? What the heck? When did it go off? I was talking... Ugh. I have got to figure out. I've been trying to use hotkeys, and apparently these freaking hotkeys, I have 2 keyboards, and it's only supposed to be set to 1, but anyway, I'm still working on fixing all this stuff. I was talking about how we're almost to the end of book 1. Book 1 is chapters to 57, and then book 2 is gonna jump into the past. 58 to 88 is gonna be his human life, and then we'll jump back into the future. So we're coming up on a cliffhanging end there. Next time we will probably finish up to chapter 57 and continue from there. That'll be fun. Yeah, so yeah, that'll be fun. I will be back next time with more book. Tomorrow is Scumbag System. We're due a watch tonight. I don't know what time. I'm going to rest my voice for a little bit, and then we'll see what folks want to watch. We've got to finish Scumbag System. Heaven Official's Blessing is out. We still haven't finished The Untamed. I think we're on the last 2 episodes. If you want to watch stuff with us, join the Discord. Links are in the description. I'm going to go work on my hotkeys and figure out why they aren't working the way I want. I don't want to buy one of those stupid, things. It's like $200 for another keyboard that you just hit, and anyway, it seems dumb to me. Spend that much money. I'm going to set it up with this stupid keyboard if I can get it to work right. That's all the news, I think, for now. Still working on a bunch of stuff and setting things up, and, sorry I really haven't been as active as normal lately. December's always a busy month, and my family's had a lot going on, unfortunately, so hopefully things will get back to normal more soon. Thanks for your support. Thanks to all of our members, like Delvin, Alice, Kohi, Jeff. Y'all are amazing, and I love you so much. I will see you guys next time. Bye!